Good morning, Leah Shaw here. I am at my property this morning. I have two large trucks on site that are clearing the trees that came down during the storm. So I want to talk a little bit about the clearing of these trees. I had three very large ceiba trees that ran along one of the property lines. During the recent hurricane, two of them came down, the two largest ones, and these are trees that grow to over 200 feet, and they came down literally roots and all, like the entire root mass came out of the ground. So it gave me a very good idea of how deep those roots really were, which compared to the size of the tree isn't very deep. This is also a tree that is considered a garbage tree by Dominicans, only because it doesn't bear fruit. Well, it doesn't bear any kind of sort of edible or usable fruit. It has no medicinal purposes. They don't use it for anything, and the entire trunk and all of the branches are covered in very nasty short thorns. So it's a very difficult tree to work with as well. Plus it grows really large, and it's not a particularly strong tree. So it does tend to, if not the whole tree, come down in high winds, but certainly large branches. So they were on the north side of the property. So they were providing some shade, but ultimately not a ton of shade, because they were on the north side. So if they'd been on the south side, then, I think the loss would have been a lot greater. But the fact that these two trees came down, I felt was almost a blessing, because if I had already built these two buildings, these two trees would have come down right on top of these two buildings. So I don't know what kind of damage would have been done. But anyway, a third one was still standing. So when I came to having to cut up the two massive fallen trees, both of these trees were over 100 feet tall. So they needed to be cut up and removed from the property, including the giant root balls these root balls were massive, like the diameter of a large round dining room table, very big. Needed to be removed as well. So I made the decision to remove the third tree at the same time. I talked to an arborist to see if it's a tree that is manageable. Like, is it possible to keep it at sort of the height and the diameter that it was at now, so that it didn't grow to 200 feet and become this, monster that was haunting the property. The other thing about these trees is they have literally a fist-size seed pod that in the summer, when it gets super hot here, like over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, they literally explode. And when they explode, they separate. So now you have like 12 projectiles, and they shoot out quite, rapidly. So being hit by one, especially in the face or in the eye or something, could be very dangerous. So it's just not a nice tree. So my decision to take it down, and talking to an arborist and finding out that there's no way to really manage the size of it, I decided to take it out. So the problem I had with removing the tree is, here in the Dominican Republic, you're really not allowed to remove trees. So I decided to use the storm as my time to actually remove this small tree. I decided to do this on a Sunday, when most government people aren't working, most people aren't in the neighborhood, most construction workers aren't around. And the plan was to cut down the tree that was still standing, and there was another tree that was standing, but it was dead. So we also removed that one, but it was already done. We only removed one live tree, and of course cut up the other two who had massive diameters. So just the chainsaw cutting up of those two trees was a big job. So we did that on a Sunday, and that was fine. There was no one around, no one saw. It wasn't a big deal. So on Monday, we hired the big truck, the big dump truck, and the tractor that was going to scoop up all of the logs that had been cut up and put them into the big dump truck, and the dump truck takes it away to wherever. So I hired the same guy that I hired 2 years ago to actually clear the property. So to clear the property using the same two trucks, he literally just ripped out all these bushes and stuff that was here. All of it was junk, and a bunch of garbage piles that were here. and for 3,500 pesos, so about 70 US dollars per truckload. So that included the labor and the 2 guys and the removal costs, everything per truckload to remove. This time around, he quoted me 5,000 pesos. So now we're at $100 US. That's 2 years later. So, you know, gas has gone up. I do understand that. Labor's probably gone up as well. So for me, that was fine. The problem I had was when he showed up with a smaller dump truck. So because of that, what I thought was going to be maybe 3 or 4 loads has turned into 7 loads. So that's a discussion, because I happen to have video of the trucks from 2 years ago. So I'm going to have a discussion with him today about, look, dude, you know, you've brought a smaller truck. So we'll probably have to renegotiate price. We'll see how that goes. I'll let y'all know how that goes. But as it sits right now, the 7 loads that Will have finished, I'm just here on the second morning. He just had the one last load to do, the biggest dump. He left till today. So as soon as that gets done, then I'm gonna sit and have a talk with him. But as it sits today, including the Sunday where I had somebody else come with a chainsaw and cut everything up, the total cost was 40,000 pesos. So that's 750 US dollars. So that's 750 US dollars to cut up and remove 4 trees in excess of 100 feet tall. Massive trees with massive thorns in them. So for 750 US dollars, that's still a very good price. In Canada, we would pay between $1,200 and $1,800 for 1 tree, just to remove 1 large tree and have it removed from the property. So for 4 of them to pay 750 for me is a good deal, even though I'm still going to renegotiate it. So that's that part of the story and that part of the equation of what I'm doing. So after I think the 3rd load, when both trucks were off the property, I was sitting here and 2 police officers showed up. And they started questioning what I was doing and removing trees. Now don't forget, the 4th tree that I removed, well, I shouldn't have removed. So I know that. So, and they could clearly see that 2 of the trees had come up by the root balls. So they could clearly see that I had not cut down those trees. But the dead tree that I had cut down, the top of it was dead, clearly dead, but it had already been removed by a truck. So there was no way to show these police that, you know, yeah, I cut down this 1 tree, but it was already dead. The 4th tree was, you know, it was already removed, and you could also see that we had cut it. So in their mind, I had cut down 2 trees. So they weren't happy about that. And they were asking me for 3,000 pesos as a pass to, you know, for them to not worry about these trees. And that's, you know, 60 US dollars, which at the end of the day isn't a huge deal, but, you know, I get everything for me is always going to be a negotiation. You know, that's the way they are. That's the way I am. So he tried to use, he asked to see my paperwork. So I showed him the paperwork that I have, because I have approvals for the property to do everything that I'm doing, except of course remove that 1 tree. And he looked at the paperwork and he's like, oh, this paperwork is from last April. You only had 90 days to clear the property. I said, yeah, last April, the property was cleared. I said, these trees came down in the hurricane. So he's like, oh, you know, that's not important. You can't use the hurricane as an excuse, which of course I can. But, you know, I wasn't about to argue with him. So I let him, you know, sort of do his, like, you know, important official, this is paperwork and this is dates and this is your obligation and this is why I'm here and this is who I am and this is why I'm so important. So after everything was said and done, I gave him 500 pesos and off they went. So 500 pesos is $10. And, you know, 2 other police may show up at some point in time with some other, you know, technicality in my paperwork that they're going to decide is there that really doesn't exist. But it's kind of the way it is here. So, you know, for me, it's kind of neither here nor there. it's the way it is. Is it corruption? Absolutely. You know, two cops showing up and say, yeah, give us some money and we'll look the other way. I mean, there's no other word for it. But does it happen all the time here? Yeah, it does. So I can either moan and groan and bitch about it and go and talk to the mayor and freak out, or I can give the dude $10 and know that from now on, these two guys are going to pass by and wave, and that'll be the end of it. So for me, the $10 is probably worth it. So on top of all of that, I guess it's more, yesterday was kind of a day of having to renegotiate a job that is pretty much complete, and a day of typical Dominican corruption. So I really wanted to share that with you guys. Peace out.